I'm Austinlugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about The Third Man.
Before we get started today, just a quick shout out to our friends at the Things We Do podcast. This is a podcast about movies, influencers, everything Hollywood, culture, and life. It's a fun podcast, very different from our podcast. It's very pop culture heavy, a lot of stuff about celebrities and just what's going on in the world. If you do have the time, please give them a listen. They're an amazing podcast. So do that.
You chose The Third Man, 1949, British noir film, directed by Carol Reed. I'd never seen it before, of course. This month we're doing horror and horror adjacent movies. Third Man's, I guess it's a kind of a thriller, I guess. I wouldn't say it's a horror film, but it's neat. It's good. I think it works well in the category enough.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's murder and sabotage.
Yeah, that's true. There's murder and intrigue, and it kind of also has like a very uneasy tone to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think it works well in the category. I think for sure.
So let's get into it.
Yeah.
The third man starts out. There's this guy. His name's Holly. And he's come to town on a mysterious purpose to meet this man. And he goes to meet this man, and the man is not there. Like, he goes to his apartment and he's not there. He's like, "Where'd this guy go?" And they're like, "Oh, that guy's dead." He's like, "What?" So he goes to the funeral, and I love that funeral scene. I don't know why I like the funeral scene so much. It's just, there's almost like there's this comedic undertone to a lot of it, almost, I guess. And like, he's just like walking by, and he's like, "Oh yeah, there's the funeral," and that's where they introduce you to like all of the different players in the game, the femme fatale, and the other characters that are going to be a part of it. I think you meet the detectives there too. I think
He meets like Major Calloway is the main guy, and he also meets the heavy cop guy too there. Yeah, you're right. You're basically introduced to everyone involved. Although Kurtz is there. I forgot that Kurtz is at the funeral. And it's Harry Lime as well. Harry Lime is the one who has died. Childhood friend. And yeah, I do like the scene. For some reason, like I guess it must be like a Vienna thing where Catholic thing or whatever, where they get the little scoops of dirt and they put it in the
yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That's pretty cute. Holly, he's just like what the hell? Like I went all the way here and I guess my friend's dead. He talks to the British military guys. They're like, "Hey, we should go and have a drink." They talk a little bit. He gets punched in the face, which is pretty funny. Although that guy who punches him in the face, "I love your books." It's revealed that he writes Western fiction. He writes Westerns. Calloway basically reveals to him like, "Look, your friend Harry, like he was a scumbag. He was a criminal." He doesn't really give any details yet, but he's basically just letting him know like he was caught up in a racket, as they say in the movie. He wasn't a very good guy, and Holly doesn't really believe them at all.
Yeah. I guess it's important to note, we didn't mention this, but at the very beginning of the film, it opens with stock footage, or like found footage, quote unquote, basically, because this is supposed to be right after World War II.
Post World War II Vienna.
And so there's all these different districts. There's like a Russian district, and there's an American district, and like a British district. It's basically all of the different occupied places, and it's all like kind of mapped out. And they explain like kind of how it works at the beginning.
Yeah.
One of the big things is racketeering is like a big thing here, because you can't like get anything. So it's common that people will sell things for other things. And it's suggested that Harry has been racketeering of some kind, which of course Holly is infuriated by. He's like, no, this can't be. And one of the things that I love about this scene in particular, and a lot of the scenes, is while not a lot really happens in the scene, it's kind of just two people talking, the way the kind of music kind of plays, so many Dutch angles. There's just so many Dutch angles in this movie.
Yeah, and I would say that like it makes sense with the tone of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Thor where it's just the Dutch angles are random. And I think it's what's interesting is like the music that's played throughout the theme basically is so like upbeat and lively, and when they play it kind of in these kind of like intense and serious moments, it creates this weird juxtaposition between what you're hearing and what you're seeing, especially when you have a Dutch angle, right? Because it's just two people talking. And if you just shot like a shot, reverse shot. Like it's very simple and like not a lot really happens, but because the music's playing under it, that sounds, a little too upbeat, and then also the Dutch angles, it creates this weird tone that I think they do really well throughout the film.
Well, I think the purpose of it, I think I know exactly what you're talking about. I think the purpose is because as the movie progresses, so Harry arrives in Vienna, and Vienna at this point in time is a very weird city. It's basically a completely disheveled and fucked city. Like they walk around the city and it's just covered in ruins, but then there are also regular buildings, and there's tons of different people from all over the world here, and everybody's like caught up in some illegal racket. And Holly, he's kind of like being spinned up in this kind of like really weird, kind of strange city where the visuals and the music kind of add to that effect, I think, which is my favorite part of the movie. I would say that's probably the best thing that the movie does, is that creates kind of like, I wouldn't say like a horrific feeling, but more kind of like an unsettling feeling, because it's almost like you're kind of there with Holly as he's kind of experiencing the city, and it kind of progresses and progresses until you get to kind of like the final part of the movie. And yeah, the music is all to sit there, which I thought was kind of weird. I was watching this movie with a friend, and he said that it sounded like SpongeBob music, and I couldn't get it out of my head when you. I was like, oh yeah, it does kind of sound like that. It's pretty good. Like the music itself is pretty good, and it is kind of weird, but it does. I think when you look at it overall, in terms of like just how it contributes to kind of like this strangeness to it, and sort of like kind of this juxtaposition, like you mentioned, I think it works well.
And so after he gets punched in the face by just this lovable cop, one of my favorite characters, I think, who, as we said, loves his Western novels that Holly writes. They go to a hotel where, and basically they told him in the talk that, hey, not only is a racketeer, but you need to get out of here. You need to leave. You're not welcome here.
There's not really a reason for you to be here anymore.
Yeah. And so he gets to the hotel and he's like, well, something just doesn't add up. And we take this perspective, which is very common in film noirs, which is the perspective of this sort of naive passerby. It's not like you're a hardened detective. It's not like Chinatown, where it's this guy who's just like, this very capable detective. It's this guy who doesn't really know a lot. And I think it's an interesting perspective, because through a lot of the film, you're experiencing the world through this narrator's eyes, right? Like you're not seeing it through like the tech, like you don't see all the evidence. You're only seeing what he's seeing. And so I think that's part of the reason why it is so suspenseful, is because you don't really know what's going on or like how it's going to happen. Like it just kind of like, that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It's just like a good, well-developed noir in which you kind of discover everything incrementally. But like you said, he goes to the hotel and he meets like the guy who like owns it or manages it, and he's like, hey, or like some guy, literature guy, who's like, hey, I know you write books and everybody loves your books here, you should do a talk. This guy throughout the movie keeps badgering him to do like a talk at like something.
Yeah.
And then he meets Baron Kurtz, which is one of Harry's friends. And then he kind of tells him what happened, where outside of his home, I guess Harry was hit by a car, and then his doctor came by, and then he's like, yeah, he's dead, or something like that. And the people that were supposedly there were Baron Kurtz, or the Romanian guy, Popescu, and the doctor, and then Harry himself, and then the doctor later. And they carried Harry to like the side of the street after the accident. So that's kind of like the story of how Harry died, I guess you could say, supposedly.
But something doesn't add up, because there's too many. Because like in the police report, it says there's only a certain amount, but there he sees another person, the third man, if you will. And that's where he leads his investigations, to find out who this mysterious other person is.
Yeah, that's the title of the movie.
The third man.
And around this time too, you meet Anna, and Anna's she's like an actress. I like that actor, by the way, that plays Anna. I've seen her in a couple other things, and she's very good. She's like in a couple Dario Argento movies, including Suspiria, and she's very, very good.
Yeah.
She's fantastic. I believe she's Italian. Anna and Holly, they're suspicious about the death. Seems kind of weird. They don't think it's an accident. And, they're kind of sniffing around, going around. And they go to her house, and they find out that the police are searching through her flat, of course. And they discover a forged passport or something like that. And it's revealed a little bit later that like Harry helped to forge the passport. At this time too, Holly is going around. He talks to the doctor, Dr. Winkle. I like the Dr. Winkle character a little bit, because I like the conversation that he has with him, because because the doctor, so he keeps saying Dr. Winkle, and he's like, it's Dr. Winkle, like with the V sound. I like that because like that's once again like another element in the whole kind of like hodgepodge of Vienna at this time. Like it's also kind of like this, like the language barrier. Like there's tons of different languages now, and Holly like just can't speak any of them. He can only speak English. He can really only speak to British people and people who kind of know how to speak English. Basically, everyone that he talks to does speak English. But once again, it's kind of like another barrier that's kind of separating himself from, I guess, I don't want to say reality, but kind of just how like weird the city is at the time and how like strange everything is going on and how he is just kind of like sinking deeper into it. So I kind of like that conversation because once again, it's like kind of really hammering in how like different everyone is from each other. And yeah, Dr. Winkle kind of just says the same story about, there were two guys there, not three.
How mysterious. And kind of going off the whole idea of there's almost this sort of surreal aspect to the film, I think, in a certain sense. And one of the things I love about it is, you talk about him not only being able to speak English, but they also put right, because you're from Harry or Holly's perspective, you also don't know anything anyone else is saying. So there'll be a lot of conversations that'll be happening like simultaneously, or like he'll have to use an interpreter in a lot of scenes. And that's the role that our femme fatale takes in a lot of the scenes, is she's often an interpreter for him. And so you don't really know if what she's telling is the truth, or there's these often sidelong conversations, or like is the translation off, and it often feels like he's just a step behind everyone else.
Well, it kind of also like that, what you just said, what we just said just now, it kind of feeds into the next part of the movie where the porter is like, I have more information to give you. And he's like, okay, 1 second. I'm going to let them know that I talked to you. I was like, I don't know about you. When I was watching that, I was like, you're so stupid. And they kill him. They kill the porter. And then Anna and Holly get there. And while they're there, because the porter and Holly had an argument earlier in the movie, then there was a little boy nearby. And the little boy nearby was like kind of pointing at Holly because he's a stranger, he did it or something like that, And this crowd, they kind of turn into a mob and they kind of want to get Holly because they think he did it, I guess. They don't really have any evidence and he obviously didn't do it. Mm-hmm. That's kind of caused because there's like kind of like a cultural language barrier going on, which is difficult to contend with, I would say.
Yeah. There's almost like this Kafka-esque kind of feel to this, like the way, the kind of political aspect of it and the way everyone kind of just like functions with each other. Like often it doesn't feel like conversations between like two people, and that's not criticism saying like, oh, this is badly written, but it often feels like people are saying the things that they want to say without hearing the other person, right? It's just like people are saying different things. And I love that mob scene because earlier in the movie, even though I'd seen this movie before, when I saw that boy, because it's very like kind of offhanded, it's just like the porter's talking and he's just talking to the two of them, and like a ball comes into the room and he's like, oh, he gets the ball and he throws it and then the boy leaves. And I remember watching it again, even though I had seen it before, going, what the hell's the point of that boy? Like, I don't understand, why is that there? Like, what is that? Like, I know there has to be some reason, but for the life of me, I could not remember why. And then when they do that reveal later on that it's his son during his death, I think it's a very like astute way to do it. And it's not like, right, it's not like this 10-minute explanation of, oh, hello, son, blah, 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 having this big conversation of having to explain who he is and what he is. It's just kind of there. And it's the willingness of Carol Reed, who is one of my favorite directors, made a lot of great British noir films, just ability to trust the audience and say, look, here's like this and here's that, and then just like go with it what you will. It's a very well thought out scene.
It's a very well thought out movie.
Yeah.
I like the scene afterwards where Holly goes to the hotel and then he's picked up by a cab.
Yes.
And it's driving like really fast, so you think they're gonna like go somewhere to kill him. And yeah, he's like, they're going through the streets of Vienna, which once again, like Vienna looks great with the black and white photography. Like you said, a lot of Dutch angles, but also very like harsh lighting. Just like it feels like there's not really, except maybe when they're in rooms, it doesn't feel like there are a lot of grays, if that makes sense. It feels like there are a lot of like blacks and a lot of whites in terms of like,
yeah,
when they're in rooms, there's like grays and stuff like that. But like when they're outdoors, like in the streets, everything is very stark. It's like this color or this color. So he's driving around like really fast, and Holly's like freaking out, and then he stops and they get out, and it's like, oh, it was just because we were going to the book club to do the speech, which is a very funny reveal. A lot of good, like you said, a lot of good reveals, a lot of good kind of like funny or interesting reveals that kind of like reveal like why something was there, what this was leading to. Pretty good. And he goes to the speech and then he bombs.
He certainly does, because he's absolutely terrified, which makes sense why he would be terrified. I mean, there's men being supposedly murdered, and there's men after him, and he keeps being warned not to do this or to do that. And he just witnessed a murder and been blamed for a murder.
The whole movie, the whole like first half of the movie are just people telling him like, you shouldn't get involved in this. You should just leave. Like every character says that. Every character says that at least once to Holly. Like, you should not be involved. You should go.
And yet he keeps being involved.
It's just so funny. It's almost like kind of like if you were making like a noir movie, like a satire of a noir movie, I would definitely put something like that in there where like all the characters are like, this is nothing, you shouldn't get involved in this or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. It has such a strange tone to it, because there's moments like that reveal when he's at the book talk thing where like it feels like so scary, and then just the juxtaposition of it being kind of this meaningless thing, like it's comedic, but it doesn't feel.
No, it's pretty comedic.
Yeah, it's comedic, but it doesn't feel like it's comedic merely to be comedic, if that makes sense. Like it doesn't feel like it's just like it's not. It doesn't feel like it's trying to make fun of the genre or trying to make fun of the film. Like it's still taken.
Making fun of the genre, no.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it takes it seriously, and yet it can still have this tone that it walks a very thin line, which I think is very impressive, because it's able to be dramatic and intense, but at the same time it has these moments that are pretty funny, and yet it doesn't like take away from any of it, I think.
I thought it was going to be like pretty serious. I thought it was going to be like pretty serious and dour, but it's not too serious and dour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think it takes itself too seriously, which is good. And the Romanian guy shows up just to kind of wrap up the fucking scene. He's like, you should stick to fiction, or like, what are you going to do about your next book? And Holly's like, oh, it's going to be The Third Man. It's about it's a murder story. And they're like, you should stick to fiction or something like that. And two thugs try to get him, and I think he runs away. I think that's how that sequence ends.
I think so. And then is the next scene where he goes to the police department again?
Yes, that's where Calloway reveals like all the evidence.
So we come to find out that Harry Lime was a racketeer, but not just any sort of racketeer. He has been racketeering penicillin. Not only is he racketeering penicillin, he's watering down penicillin and then selling it to people. Because I guess only British have penicillin, or like only one like occupation group has penicillin. But he's like buying it from them, or like people are stealing it and he's buying it from them and he's selling it to other people.
He's also diluting it though. So when he dilutes it, it also injures and kills people.
So it kind of ruins the point of the penicillin, because he's got to make all of that money. He can't just sell the penicillin. He needs to double his profit.
It's like penicillin. And it's like, oh, that's really bad. Basically, that's Holly's reaction. He hears about this and he's like, yeah, this is pretty bad.
It's not great. And they show him all the evidence and they're like, oh yeah, he's definitely been doing this. And they explain that when you dilute the penicillin, the lucky ones are killed, but the unlucky ones basically go mad.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yep. He's like, oh, okay. Well, bye. And he visits Anna again. And Anna is, they have another conversation. Throughout their conversations, they develop kind of this relationship. It's clear Anna and their conversation, it's clear that Anna still loves Harry, but they at the same time they're kind of cultivating this relationship. It's interesting. And she also knows that about Lime's crimes. You know what I mean? She kind of doesn't care, honestly. And then you get the next big reveal in the movie, which is a great reveal.
It's my favorite reveal. He's looking out the window and it's like pitch black, and someone like turns on a light like in one of the other apartments.
Well, first you have the little cat.
Oh yes, that's right. Because when they're in there, I love that moment. So they're in the room and he's like trying to pet this cat, and she's like, the cat only likes Harry, like it's never really liked people. So the cat runs away, and you follow the cat and you see that the cat like stays next to this like guy's foot and is like playing with his shoes, and you're like, "Is that Harry? It's got to be Harry. Is it Harry?" And then he looks out the window, and someone turns on the light.
He's outside though. He's not in the apartment.
That's right. He's like across the street, right?
Because and he sees someone, and he's like, "Who are you?"
Yeah, and like the light turns on, you see his face, and of course it's the incredible Orson Welles before he got fat, like when he was still skinny.
He's like kind of big in this movie, though. I mean,
Yeah, I mean he's not as big as he.
I would say every form of Orson Welles is fine with me.
Absolutely.
I like every form. I like every iteration of him.
Legitimately have not seen a bad performance of Orson Welles. Honestly, just incredible. Like every time.
He has a great voice. I mean, his voice, like he just has a very impressive voice. It's very great.
I've seen like a couple of documentaries about him, and like I've read a bunch of stuff about him.
I know you're a big fan of him. I haven't seen like too. I mean, I'm a big fan of Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
I love the movie, but I've seen very little of him. I've seen Never Fake, which I really enjoy. Yeah, he's just not a filmmaker or actor that I really delved in, but he is great. That's for sure.
One of the reasons he's actually in the movies that he's in, because he actually wasn't really big into act. Like, of course, he got to start in acting because he was in, theater in Ireland, and then went to London, and they, eventually did some radio dramas. That's of course how he got into Citizen Kane and blah blah. But once he started making movies, like that's kind of all he wanted to do. So the only reason he would take acting positions is so he could pay for his movies, because famously he couldn't get producers to produce his films because Hollywood absolutely hated Orson Welles. Partly because his very first film, Citizen Kane, is loosely based off of like this big newspaper guy at the time who was super pissed off when Citizen Kane was made. He's basically like a 1940s version of Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I mean, Amazon owns Washington Post. I didn't know. I was watching a documentary about Apocalypse Now because I watched it recently. I didn't know that Orson Welles' first movie was going to be A Heart of Darkness.
Yeah, it was one of his many failed films. He shot it in like Portugal or something, or like I believe he shot it in South America.
Well, I thought he didn't even get past pre-production with Heart of Darkness.
Maybe I thought he was in like, I thought he'd started shooting and like they got into like production hell. Maybe not. Maybe he was still in pre-production because he also famously tried to do a Don Quixote film, which passed. There's I guess there's an obvious reason, but Orson Welles, like a lot of his films are considered like lost films. Like you can't find, because they were like stuck in either pre-production or they got early in production. I mean, even his films that came out, like Othello, took like 5 years to make the film because like he'd make part of the film and then he'd run out of money, and so he'd have to wait like a year or 2 years to get more funding for the film, which is just, I think one of the reasons I'm so interested with Orson Welles is because of like, I mean, I do think he's one of the great directors. When you watch his work, it's just masterful from beginning to end. But I think another reason I admire Orson Welles so much more than almost any other director is because of all the directors he seems to have the hardest time making movies of like any director I've seen. Like it's just impossible every time he wants to make a movie. It's just heart-wrenching, especially, which is weird because like his first
he made Citizen Kane. I know it wasn't a huge success when it first came out, but you'd think by like, once you get into like the 50s and maybe in the 60s and the 70s, it'd be a little bit easier, but I guess it wasn't.
Yeah, and Orson Welles actually even talked about this in a lot of interviews because basically the rest of his life was talking about Citizen Kane. And he says a lot of times that he wished he never made Citizen Kane because now every film he makes after that, right, is compared to Citizen Kane. Like imagine, right, making what people consider the greatest movie of all time and then having to make the rest. You only make, right, he's 25 when he makes that first film. He still has an entire career ahead of him. And the rest of his films are, which I actually think Citizen Kane is one of his weakest films, like when you watch his filmography. But the fact that everything's compared to what's, not immediately, but within like 10 years, considered a classic or this great film, and to have everything he made compared to that is just, you could see it like when he does interviews later on, just like how heartbroken he was about the fact that like he can't go and just make movies. Like everything has to be compared to this one film. Like he's stuck to that. And you kind of see that a lot of times when directors kind of make like, when early on they make like a film that's very famous for one reason or another, they kind of feel like trapped by it and they can never like break out of it. It's the same way like an actor sort of feels typecasted a lot of time, like when they get into a certain role. I think
you see that a lot with music as well.
It's frustrating, and that I think that's really, I don't know.
Digressing from Orson Welles, I did kind of see that coming, mostly because I knew Orson Welles was going to be in the movie, and once you get halfway through the movie, you're like, all right, what character is Orson Welles going to play? Like what character? I haven't seen Orson Welles for like at all. Who could he possibly? What character could he possibly, perform? That would make the most sense. So yeah, kind of knowing that he's in the movie kind of almost ruined it for me. Doesn't mean it's still not great. It's still very, very good. It just kind of like ruined the like, whoa, I can't believe Da, da, da. But that's okay because it is very, very good. Very good reveal. Holly's like, whoa, you're alive. They have a little chase. I like the shadows. The shadows of Harry like running away and they Calloway comes and they're like, I saw him right here. He's gone. What happened to him? And they like open up this like little thing where they see that he probably escaped through the sewers. And they're like, maybe we should open up Lime's coffin.
Weird that no one checked it before they buried him.
How do you do that? Like, how do you like they don't really discuss, and I guess it doesn't really matter. They don't really discuss like how they were able to push off one dead body as if it's the other, I guess. Because when they open up the coffin, they know exactly that is not Harry Lime right away. They know it's not him. It turns out to be an orderly who used to work for him to steal penicillin. So I guess I don't know how they originally got away with it.
Maybe like Harry Lime got into the casket, and then like after they poured it.
He got into the casket. He pretended he was dead for several hours. They buried him, and then they got him up, and then they reburied. Yeah.
Well, how else would they do it? I mean, well, the doctor, right, probably pledges that this was the guy. So maybe like the police never saw him, and they do like a closed casket thing.
Wasn't Calloway there? I guess they might have done a closed casket thing in that situation. Yeah, the doctor probably manufactured it somehow.
Yeah, you're willing to. I mean, it's a good enough movie that it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, it's really not that big a deal. But and Anna, she gets questioned by Calloway about her passport and about like her relationship with Lime and stuff like that. Then you get another great scene on the Ferris wheel.
And that's the first time you really get to see Orson Welles do his Orson Welles things. And this is really, I mean, he only has a couple of scenes in the film, which whenever you watch a film with Orson Welles, you want him to be in all the scenes. But this is kind of his one big scene. And Harry's like, I need to meet him. Tell him I'll meet him here. And Orson Welles comes and he's like, hey, it's me. And I love how like happy and just like uncaring Harry is.
It's pretty funny.
Like, oh, whatever.
Yeah.
And he gets on the Ferris wheel and they're having this conversation and the Ferris wheel's moving up. And Holly reveals basically that, hey, look, I know what you're doing. It's a shitty thing. You shouldn't be doing it. And Harry's like, look down there, right? You see all these dots. Imagine if you gave $20,000 for each of these dots.
Yeah.
This is a really shitty way to look at the world. But it's the way he looks at it.
I think I read a really good Brendan O'Hare review on Letterboxd where I think he said that in this movie, Orson Welles says the most evil thing ever you could say on a Ferris wheel or something like that. Like he's on a Ferris wheel, yeah, and you're right. He's just like, would it really matter if all these dots just disappeared? Like, who cares? Who gives a fuck? He also makes that speech about like Sweden and cuckoo clocks about how, in order to create great results in the world and culture, there needs to be suffering and horrible depression or something like that, which I don't really agree with either. And he's like, in Italy, they had the Renaissance during a time when it was horrible and all this stuff. And, Sweden, they had like all this great stuff and they were healthy, but all they produced was the cuckoo clock. If you're Swedish, you're probably be a little bit upset. I'm sure they produce some good stuff.
I'm sure they got stuff.
But it's just the point of their conversation is that he's mean. He also kind of threatens him a little bit.
Yeah, he's very willing to murder his friend of 20 years.
Orson Welles is a great actor. I mean, he does a thing where he's like you said, he's like, hey, how's it going? Da, 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 da. And then within a second, he's like, I could easily kill you on the top of the Ferris wheel, but I won't.
It's great.
Calloway and Holly, he's like, Calloway's like, hey, you should help me. Da, 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 da.
But he says no. He's like, I don't want to do that. Like, I know he's a bad person, but that's, he was my best friend for 20 years. Like, he might be a terrible human being, which is, I mean, it's an interesting place to put him in. And I think it's a fair point. Like, you've known him your whole life. It's hard to just be like, yeah, let's go, ruin his life. But then the police take him to like a nursery.
It's like a hospital where a bunch of dying kids are. It's like, and then they drive and they drive more, and he's like, all right, fine, like this is fucked up. Okay, I'll help you. And I think he asked Anna, and Anna's like, no, no, no. And they also kind of, I think, make a deal where Calloway will help protect Anna if Holly helps him out. And then you have the final part of the movie where Lime is supposed to hang out with Holly at a cafe, and they're there, and there's police all around, and everybody's looking, and did a great scene. And Anna shows up, and she is very angry. She really does not care about Harry's exploits. She just likes him a lot. And she's like, Harry, go run away. There's cops everywhere. And then you get like this very like kind of long scene where Harry is like running through the sewers being chased by police.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is a great scene, I would say. It's a very pretty engaging scene. It lasts for a long time. And yeah, it's like Harry is sort of traversing kind of literally and figuratively the underbelly of Vienna. And now it's all kind of caught up with him, and he's been betrayed by his friend, and everybody's closing in on him, which I think is a great, I think that's great. And I'm trying to think like how it happens, the very end.
How he dies?
Yeah.
So Holly catches up to him, and Harry's like about to go up this stairs. And Holly's like, hey, don't do that. Like, just give up. You can live, blah, blah. And Harry's like, no. And then it cuts away from them because they both have a gun, right? They're pointing guns at each other. It cuts away. You hear a gunshot. And there's a long pause. And then you see Holly walk up. And you realize that Holly has killed Harry.
Yeah, his friend betrays him kind of in a way. I mean, he was still doing a bad thing, but then they have a second funeral for Harry. They have the funeral, and it's sad, I guess. And Anna's there. And Calloway's like, all right, I got to take you to the airport so you can fly away. And he's like, and then they pass Anna, and Anna looks pissed off. And he's like, ah, fuck it. And he gets off the car that they're on, and he kind of has this great shot where still in the graveyard, they have that great shot where Anna's kind of walking toward you, and to the left is Holly. And to try to get her attention, and he's like smoking a cigarette or whatever, but she just walks right past.
It's like super, and it's the final shot too. It's probably like a 2 minute, or I mean at least 1 minute of just like her walking. There's like almost no music. It's just like quiet, and it's just held on a single shot of her walking towards him and then just walking past. It's one of my favorite endings, to be honest, because it is so patient and quiet, and then that moment she walks past him is just so devastating.
It's very upsetting, and I think it caps it off. It'd be so stupid if they like got together. Like that'd be just so lame. Like I don't know, it'd just be kind of like
Yeah.
I think good movies end unexpectedly, and that's a good unexpected end. So I was cool with that.
So Andrew, final thoughts and rating?
Really good, fantastic. It's just a well-oiled story with plenty of intrigue, plenty of funny moments. And I think it's just like it's a great movie where the place really is like a character in itself, and it really influenced the story and the characters in every way possible. That really makes for a really interesting experience that I really enjoyed. I'll give it an 8 out of 10 for sure, but like a very high 8, I think.
Love this movie with all my heart. Carol Reed is one of the greats. I think he makes noir better than almost anyone else. I also love film noir. Film noir is one of my favorite genres. I've honestly never seen a film noir I don't like. I've seen some neo-noir and some newer stuff I don't like, but I've never seen a film noir that I dislike. I've seen some that are okay, but never one that I dislike. So this one is very close to my heart. Of course, that's Orson Welles, one of my favorites of all time. Everyone in it is just incredible. Great set pieces, visually just so stunning. The story is incredible. Even watching it, having only seen it a couple years ago, I'm still so surprised by so many different things. There's so many twists, there's so many turns. I just love everything about this film. I'm gonna give this film a 10 out of 10. I think it's a perfect film. I could watch this film every day for the rest of my life, and I would be okay with that. It's perfect. It really is.
No, yeah, I don't blame you. It really is. It's pretty great. It's quite fantastic.
All right, y'all. Thank you for listening. I'm Austinlugo. You can find me at Austinlugo12.
I'm Andrew Harp. You can find me on Twitter at adharp24.
You can find this podcast wherever you hear podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram and YouTube at With Nothing to Say Pod. You can also find us on Letterboxd and so many other places. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks.